been the president.
Sorry, I just started recording because I wanted to, if it was okay, I wanted to just record some parts of this interview.
Sure, that's fine. But I've always taken a very broad view of my role as a CFO. I've always been really good with numbers and such, but I've also, over a career, I've brought up business. Started up a enterprise development center in Bangalore. I've started up distribution centers in Ireland. I've brought up manufacturing facilities in Hong Kong. I'd get up out of my chair and make sure the numbers were okay, but go do operating things. In fact, I was the president of Excelan before Kanwal was.
Oh.
But only for about 2 months, because one of the other founders, Inder Singh, had been, I guess the polite thing is, asked to leave. And the board was very concerned that there was a disruption in the founders, the energy of the founders, and they, frankly, I think one of them said, "We can't understand a word Kanwal says, so we need you to interpret for us while we figure out what we're going to do for a CEO." And they started a search, and eventually I was put in as an acting president to try and hold things together while my primary job and success was convincing them to make Kanwal the CEO.
Very interesting. Yeah, because Kanwal, being Indian in those days, you were supposed to be an engineer and not someone that was multifunctional, right?
Yeah, although this company, right, I think there were 3 non-Indians when we had 20 employees. So there was myself, Doug Plashon, Dwayne Murray, and I think one other one, Kevin.
I think
on his last name.
And then maybe George Powers.
That was later, but yes, George and his wife both joined at the same time. That was probably maybe employee 40 or 50 by then.
Okay. So yeah, maybe we can talk about. So one thing that I saw was there in 1984. Excelan had 5 million in revenue, 3 million loss. 1985, 10 million revenue, about 100K in profit. These are from Kanwal. 1986, about 22 revenue, about 2.5 million in profit. So it kind of doubled, and then it tripled. 1988, over 2 years, 66 revenue, 6 million profit. And then 1989, a 120 million IPO, raising 10 million. So I'm assuming 120 million revenue, or maybe 120 million IPO valuation. And then 60% premium acquisition by Novell. So does that sound about right? Ballpark?
Those are all about right. There's some funny stories in there. I'm trying to remember. One of the board members was a gentleman by the name of Ed Shea. Did Kanwal never mention Ed Shea?
Okay.
And he was part of the Shea fortune, the original. His father or grandfather was part of building the railroads and railroad bridges across the West and into California. And
Shea, as in the Shea Stadium, like the New York
like in Shea Stadium, like in all the Shea family of homes, all the real estate development. Yeah. So the money went in lots of different directions, and I think there were 4 brothers and a sister who sort of divvied up responsibilities of the Shea family fortune. They were all really good at different forms of business. One of them kept the construction business. One of them, kept the trying to think, a real estate development business separate from construction, which was heavy construction. Ed was sort of technically geeky, and so they gave him a pile of money and said, "Go invest in a bunch of startups." And so he came to Silicon Valley and took his role in the Shea family businesses was high tech, but he really wasn't a technologist, and so he partnered up with the various venture capitalists, John Bosch and John Dugery, to say, "I'll come along with you. You do all your job, and I'll put some money in."
Right. Interesting.
And so this is going back to your story, really the revenue. One of the things he did, he was sitting around the board, and I remember this because you're kind of saying these stories that stick with you, right? I can think of 2 that I'll tell you on camera here, was one was this one. And so we came in with the budget, right? And put the budget down for the coming year. And it was, I think it was going from 10 to 20 million is what we said we were going to do. And he said, there's no possible way you can do that. No company's double at this size. You hardly have any customers. You only got one product. He goes, I'll bet every one of you $1,000 a piece that you can't do this plan. And Inder Singh at the time, who was our CEO, said, we'll take that bet. And the rest of us didn't have $1,000 between us, let alone each of us to be able to take that bet or lose it. And we ended up at the end of the year, we didn't get to 20, we got to it's the year we got to 17 or 18 million. And so we're sitting around the board meeting and we all brought in our checks. And because we kept we documented the bet, we'd had all this stuff. We had a third party hold all of the checks and the money and everything for the interim. And Ed said, I'll tell you what, you've done really well and you did better than I thought you would, but I don't think you can make your next year either. How about double or nothing on next year? And then we made the second year, and so he tore up all the $1,000 checks.
Nice.
But that was how he managed the executives. He just I bet you can't do that. So that was one. Another thing, I don't know if you remember one of the earlier products. So there was the product of linking computers together, but there was also the development tool called the NutCracker, which was an engineering development tool for debugging code and networks. And no, there was no such product on the market. The thing was literally custom built on a Unix frame with custom circuit boards and custom software to try and capture the traffic that was going down an internet cable and then parse it in to be able to read it, analyze it, and see what was going on. That product eventually evolved then from that to a PC-based product, and then to a single circuit board-based product, and then to a software-only product over a decade. But NutCracker, which actually stood for NUT, Network User Tool, for cracking the code of a network. And since there was no such thing in the market, and they were all one-offs, and we had a couple interested parties because everyone was very excited at being able that this was a fabulous tool, and we knew it kind of worked, but it was a little kludgy, frankly. And so we were trying to figure out the pricing, and they'd done this detailed pricing model of coming back and saying, we think we can sell this for $19,500. We wanted to keep it under some other tool that was $20,000 and wanted to be able to at least recover our costs. And we're making this presentation, and John Dugery was sitting at the board, around the board, and he goes, there's nothing else like this out there. You don't even know if it's going to work or you can produce it in high volume. I'm telling you, the price is $50,000, not $19,000, and you'll take that money and make it work. And because your customer service is going to eat you alive. So we put it out there at $49,999.
Wow.
and it started selling, and we needed every bit of that money to make it work and stick.
Right.
It was such a complicated tool, and the protocols weren't even defined then, right? I mean, Ethernet, the last two levels of the protocol hadn't even been defined yet. We built the first Ethernet cards based on what the spec was supposed to be. There weren't chips. There weren't, you had to hardwire this stuff in printed circuit boards. And even to do that, I remember when we went to get the boards built, they said no one had ever built one with that many layers. I think it needed to be, I don't know, I don't remember the number. It was either 11 or 13 layers, and no one had built one more than 9 or 10 layers before. So they said, we think we can do this, but we're not sure it'll work. The PCB manufacturing company to make the design for these products. And now, now you can put it on the head of a pin, right?
So did NutCracker become pretty successful business line, or?
It was always the secondary line, because it was the boards, which eventually went into Unix machines and DEC Maxes and IBM machines, and allowed them to communicate and transfer files over an Ethernet cable, or over the wide area network at that time, over modems, was the bigger business because it could be an end user business or an OEM business. and was coming down the learning curve as chips became available and as PCs started proliferating, people wanting to hook them up to, file share and print share and other things. So that became the driving business. But the NutCracker as a tool continued to evolve, and I don't remember how many years, maybe a decade, from when it was a giant, could hardly lift a Unix computer that could hardly be lugged around, until ultimately it was a circuit card and a software you could plug into a PC. But
Right.
the idea was the same, being able to analyze traffic on a network.
Right. And then the third iteration of this was the LANanalyzer that became more of an end user facing tool.
Yes. The
Got it.
NutCracker became the LANanalyzer. Yes. That's when it got to the circuit card and PC level. It was not a standalone box anymore.
Right. Right. Can you talk a little bit about some of the pricing decisions aside from the NutCracker, the story that you just told of Jin Dugri? But Kanwal talked a lot about how he shifted pricing. He mentioned, if I can just read this out loud verbatim to you, he said, hardware sales were common and standard. It cost $200 to build a board. So Excelan priced it at $1,000 list, but common practice was to give a 50% volume discount. However, there were no models for software pricing, and Excelan had TCP/IP software for PC, Unix, Microvax, VAX, PDP, blah, blah, blah. And pricing was at $60 a copy for software, per software, I guess, per node. And then they went to sell to OEMs, and then he found that the math didn't work for this to become a sustainable business to OEMs. And so he transferred. So then the first step he took was against the wishes of management. Apparently, he said he is to raise software pricing from $60 to $600, despite the objection of sales leadership. And then he talked about another drastic move to raise pricing to $14,995 software, which was still only 50% of DECnet, as an example, which was selling at $29,995. And so he kind of segmented pricing by, okay, for DEC, for Unix, for Microvax. So for DEC it was $14,995. For Unix it was $9,995. For Microvax it was $5,000. For PC it was $1,995. So interesting segmentation. So he actually introduced this the notion of pricing segmentation by customer type or by environment.
That all rings true to me. I don't recall it specifically, or if those are the right prices or not. But
Yeah.
The idea of saying during that period, or prior to that period, just prior to that period, software was kind of free in the giveaway, right? I mean,
Right.
like before Microsoft DOS became successful, DR DOS out of Monterey was just given away to developers.
Right.
And it's eventually what became the kernel for Microsoft DOS. And they just took a free copy and embellished it. So
Right.
there's lots of trying to figure out where the value was. And I think Kanwal was one of the very earliest people who said the value's in the software. Most of the hardware is going to come down drastically in pricing and be commoditized. And so you have to price the software to value, and the value is bound up in what is the system it's being used in, and how many. And so besides just the varying it by VAX, et cetera, the company went through various iterations of saying, is it a per seat pricing? Is it a site license? Is it a,
Right.
bundles of 10, 50, 100, 250 with discounts for use, based on nodes? Is it, so we over time tried a lot of different pricing mechanisms. The first one was because as you say, the various, whether it was an IBM mainframe costing millions of dollars, or a Unix machine costing tens of thousands of dollars, or a VAX $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in those days, that there was an umbrella model that said the bigger equipment can withstand a larger price point even if the software is relatively, the fundamental work element of the software is similar, but it had to be ported to each one of those different environments to run on the operating systems. And at that point, all those operating systems were different. Unix had a half a dozen Unix flavors at the time. There wasn't one. So
Right.
each one of those had to be custom written. And so the value was associated with yes, it works with this family of computers, but the bigger value became when you could say, oh, you can hook your PC to your VAX, to your IBM mainframe, to your terminals, and all of those can share a file and a printer, right? So then that was when the true value of networking came out, when you could combine the dissimilar pieces of equipment on your network.
Right. So as CFO, what were some of the key challenges that you were experiencing that you had to make sure you were, as part of your job when Excelan was growing so fast in the time between 85 to 89 or whatever?
Well, I think of it as sort of two periods. The pre-public period was getting, say, defining a business plan that everybody believed in and using that plan as a tool to allocate resources to the most important things to do next, right? And that's kind of how private companies work. You get an agreement of a list of priorities and you figure out how much resource you have. And again, these were the old days. You couldn't go to the market as a private company and raise $500 million, right? We raised the total from founding to public, we raised $7 million and had $2 million of it still on the balance sheet when we went public. So over that, all that time, we only spent $5 million. So it was, really focusing on how and where is that going to get spent? What is the most important thing to do? And how do you, stay cost effective, reduce cost, and make it to the next milestone so you could raise the next $1 million from the VCs. After that, once public and getting a little bigger, pile of cash, then it becomes, how do you use that to leverage and grow faster? And how do you get out and tell the story so people are, believe in what you're doing and want to follow you and want to, to leverage what you're doing, because the financial press is actually a part of marketing the company, right? They write stuff, people get excited about it, people make a few dollars, and pretty soon they're talking about it. And that it's not, as important as getting the engineering press convincing engineers to buy your product, but it still is an overall balancing act of saying this is a good company and it's safe to buy their products. They're healthy and they've got a good following. So right. the focus changes, I think, in terms of both raising money and communicating to the outside world, following the holders and trying to stay with, to build a following among the technology investors.
Right. And then when doing the IPO, I'm assuming there was a roadshow or you had to present to many different Wall Street banks. Who was the most active in those presentations and communicating the value and the vision? Because it was still kind of a new space, very technical space.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kanwal was always really good on the road. And one of the things, he even talks about it himself to this day about saying he felt he was a shy child because he felt he had a speech impediment, and that he also, with a very thick Indian accent here in the United States, he at the I want to call it, whether it was a board request, and I'm not sure what the original source of this was. They said, would you be willing to get a speech therapist to come help you be able to be understood more easily? And he said, absolutely, absolutely, I'm in it. And so he went and picked one. He went to Stanford and went to their, whatever, I forget, speech pathology department, and hired a lady, and I don't remember her last name. Her first name was Margaret. And she would come into his office, close the door. I remember I was there the very first visit, and she was semi-retired, wore these, granny button-up boots, was just a very forthright, strong woman, but, probably in her late 60s at the time. the first thing she did was walked in and said, "Kanwal, open your mouth." She reached in her hand and grabbed his tongue and pulled it out as far as she could. And he's just sitting there going, ah, 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 ah. And she goes, "You don't have any speech impediment. We can fix this. There's nothing wrong with your tongue."
Wow. What a story.
But it was those kind of days and those kind of stories that, you know, that it was important for him to be able to tell the story, because frankly, he was the brightest one of the bunch, and he, you know, had a vision and that was excited about it. But he said, in order to be heard, I have to be understood. And said, so took the personal, and I don't know if we want to bring this up in group form. Maybe you want to talk to him about this and say, Jim mentioned this. You want to tell me about this Margaret speech therapist, and see what he says? Because I don't, you know, no sense embarrassing him about this whole problem.
Sure.
But I mean, within 6 months, you know, she made a dramatic difference in his, you know, in his skills and abilities in standing up and communicating in public.
Wow. Ah, wonderful. I'm trying to think if there's any more questions I have. I don't have any sort of numbers, financial statements, any of that sort. I don't know if there's anything you might be able to dig up and potentially share that could be handy. If not, no big.
Wow, I'm thinking back, trying to say, did I keep any of that stuff? And you got to say, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I've been CFO of 5 public companies since then. And I'm remembering there was no such thing as, you know, as spreadsheets or even application software for the most part for software at that time. The first business plan I wrote in Unix using a multi-plan Unix precursor to spreadsheets. It was basically a columns and rows software for Unix machines. And I wrote the first, you know, created a general ledger system, created a department system, created it so that it would all roll up and publish into statements. And so it was all done by brute force. Now later, yes, we bought, you know, external software that by that time kind of, you know, the off-the-shelf, readily available, simple business software. But the first 3 or 4 years, it was literally written by hand on Unix multiplan. And I may have some of those, because I remember thinking when I came across those one time, I said, these are sort of historic memorabilia, you know, pre-spreadsheet.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. But yeah, I don't have any more questions. Is there anything you'd like to share that I may not have asked that you think could be relevant, or?
No, I mean, you sort of, hopefully this is what you'll get by putting all of this together.
Yeah.
Ideas will trigger other ideas. And when I knew I was going to be talking with you, I said, okay, what things are in my mind that are funny, not funny stories, but important stories, culture stories. And it's about the pricing of the first NutCracker, the bet of the board member saying, "I'll bet you each $1,000," and the CEO saying, "We'll take it," and all the rest of us looking at each other like, "What, is he crazy?"
Yeah,
it's just how you know the inside untold stories.
Yes, exactly. Cool. Okay, awesome.
Right. I'm sure there's a